So, the first question I want to review from the homework is what was the economic motives that the United States had in Cuba? So, all of this should be reviewed. Anything that you don't know, you should take notes on. Anything you do know, you may want to add to your notes. But just in general, just what was the economic motive? Who can remind us from the homework that the U.S. had towards Cuba? Christian.
The sugar plantation?
Sugar plantations. Economic.
Came about some sugar.
There was economic motives in Cuba. And you see the sugar plantations in Cuba being what do you call it when you do this? What is this? Farmed, I guess? Harvested. There you go.
Came about some sugar.
How could I forget? We just had a harvest festival at school. God. You got the sugar, and that was one of the things that the U.S. was primarily interested in. Remember, I told you like $50 million in investment in the sugar plantations of Cuba. In fact, sugar grows pretty big. This is not in Cuba, but in another Caribbean island. This is Barbados, and when you drive by it, you can't imagine that this is basically where sugar comes from, but that's how it is grown. Now, if any of you have not had the privilege of experiencing this next thing, then your life is still worth living because you must try this. Does anybody know that with that item, you can, make sugar, which goes and makes all things sweet and everything like that, but you can also take the sugar cane and you can grind it up. Huh? They do it. Yeah, you can still get it here. And in fact, all you got to do is just, here you go. Just need some big, strong man.
Go. Come on, you guys. Come on.
And it makes a delicious juice. That juice is so good. Sugar is important to the economy. The other thing that you read about was this aspect of Spain's treatment of the Cuban people. Can someone describe to me how Spain was treating the Cuban people? Someone we haven't heard from yet. Spain, how was their treatment of the Cuban people leading some Americans to want to get involved in the situation in Cuba?
Then they put them in concentration camps?
Yes, they were put in camps. They were violating the rights of the Cuban people, and many Americans felt that something needed to be done. In fact, and you see in this political cartoon, they are very clearly demonstrating this idea of the Cuban people are being oppressed. One of the Spanish generals, General Weyler, had the nickname the Butcher because of his horrible acts of violence against the Cuban people. And so you see this happening. There was a lot of violation of the rights of the Cuban people. And so for many Americans, they felt that we, the United States, needed to do something about this. We have to get involved. We got to help them. And as Shao pointed out, there was Cuban people rounded up and put into reconcentration camps. And the Spanish did this because they said, the Cuban people are in danger because of the violence going on, so we're going to put them in these camps. The problem with these camps is they didn't have enough food. There was a lot of disease present in the camps. There wasn't very sanitary or healthy conditions. And as a result, the images you see are kind of the end result of these camps. People were starved to death. Thousands of Cuban people lost their lives or lived in very poor conditions. So once again, this is a factor that led some Americans to say, we need to get involved. We already dealt with this one, so I'll go quickly through this one. how did the destruction of the Maine lead to the Spanish-American War? And of course, the Maine sitting there off the coast of Havana, while in February of 1898, blows up. And when the Maine blows up, most Americans blame whom? Spain. Right? Remember the Maine to hell with Spain. But it's not just by chance that Spain gets blamed. My next thing that you should have known is, how does yellow journalism help contribute to the Spanish-American War? Can someone tell me what the heck is yellow journalism? Let's go on this side. Yellow journalism. What is it? Yellow. Yellow. And it was all yellow.
Isn't it kind of like where the journalists kind of exaggerate what's going on? Like if it's a problem, they exaggerate it?
Yep. Here are two journalists. Joseph Pulitzer, William Randolph Hearst. They actually competed with one another. And what they competed with one another is to sell newspapers. And one of the ways that they were able to do this is they would very often print things using a style of journalism called yellow journalism. And the idea was, let's just exaggerate, print these sensational stories. And that will sell newspapers, and which means money in the pocket. And of course, the problem with this is the truth is oftentimes sacrificed. There's a famous story where William Randolph Hearst, the guy over here on the right, he has a reporter over in Cuba named Frederick Remington. And Frederick Remington says to William Randolph Hearst, there's really no war going on here. Should I come home? Should I just come back to the U.S.? Because there's nothing really going on in Cuba. And William Randolph Hearst replies to him, well, you furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war. Let me worry about creating this kind of situation. Just give me some images, and we can make the best of it. And what these two guys were able to do is print a lot of things that drummed up support for war. Here you see them, Hearst and Pulitzer, kind of building up the war. And
Oh my God. Wow.
you may see crazy newspapers if you're ever at the checkout stand at the grocery store. You know, this is kind of one of the ridiculous ones. This one's not even real, but I just thought it was funny. Abraham Lincoln was a woman? Shocking pics found in the White House basement. News does yellow journalism today, but we don't call it yellow journalism because it's not anywhere near as bad. Remember what you looked at when we were in classes, this was some real, like, inflammatory, exaggerated stuff. You know, the whole thing was all about the enemy, reward, the Spanish mind must have done it. All these things that really imply that either the Spanish did it or, you know, Spanish treachery. So it was extreme in 1898. Now you'll notice today the news can't get away with yellow journalism the way they did back then. But they still do things to try to get viewers to tune in. If you ever watch TV like around 6, 7 o'clock, you'll have the teaser, the trailer for the 10 o'clock news. Is your soap going to kill you? Stay tuned at 10 o'clock news to find out. And you're like, oh my God. Some of you stopped showering like Michael did. And so, oh, sorry. Moving on. Yellow journalism. And if you're one of these citizens, if you're one of these individuals, you're watching all these different kind of accusations in newspaper headlines, and you don't know what to make of it because none of it's true. Or you have to sift through so much untruth to find the truth. Now, have any of you seen the greatest film movie? That's kind of redundant, right? Film movie. The greatest film about South Central. Don't
Be a menace.
be a menace
New
to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood. Seen it? You've seen it? Only one of you have seen it. There's a
I've
scene.
seen it.
You've seen it. It's one of those spoof films. It makes fun of like the urban movie gangster films, and it's by the Wayans brothers. And the reason why I bring this up is there's a thing they do throughout the film when they're trying to have a message. They have the guy. He pops up like there's like this scene where, man, we gotta stop using guns, man, because we're killing our own people. And it's all about like the hood. And then the guy pops out, message, and then he pops back in, right? He's like sending a message, and they're making fun of those films. So if you've never seen it, this probably doesn't make any sense to you. But here's my message to you. One of the reasons why on Wednesday I wanted you to look at the newspapers and make assumptions and guesses as to what happened about the Maine was to hopefully remind you of two things that are important, bigger than your grade in this class. And one of those is, one, knowing history. We talked about, repeating lessons from the past. But the other one is probably the most important thing, which is being critical. Sifting through the crap and actually being skeptical and asking people to prove what they're saying. And so I want to show you two examples, because when the Maine blew up, there was all this, oh, it must have been Spain, and people believed it. I mean, it makes sense. Spain probably did it because we were there near their colony, so they're scared. So you guys had all these theories. But here's the thing. So here's the first example. When 9/11 happened and over 3,000 people were killed on that day, the media didn't do yellow journalism, at least most of the media, because, journalism in theory is getting better. But there was a lot of speculation, like on radio or on television programs, where people were making all these assumptions or guesses as who did it. And decisions were made about who did it and what to do about what has been done. And for the most part, those decisions were based upon evidence. So eventually, who did it? You all remember? Who? Al-Qaeda, right? Al-Qaeda. And those individuals were operating out of which country?
Iraq, Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, which led to a declaration of war against Afghanistan. Now the problem is, eventually we invaded another country. Which one was that?
Iraq.
And some of the justification, not all, but some of it was, in Iraq, there are people who are supporting Al-Qaeda, which helped plan 9/11. And next thing you know, it turns out that actually was not entirely true. Let me point out another one, which none of you, I'd be surprised if you recognize this image, because I don't even know if you were born yet. This is an image of a building in Oklahoma City where the Oklahoma Thunder play. And in the 90s, a car was driven up to the building. It's a federal building. The car pulled up to the building with explosives in it, and it blew up. And that is the result of the explosion. It was in the news, and actually a lot more people died than the 31 initially reported. And the car bomb that went off destroyed the 9-story federal office building. Women, children, men, innocent people were in there. It was a national tragedy. And when it first happened...
Oh! I know the face, because I know that dude, that terrorist.
Yeah. When it first happened, though, there was an assumption that who did it must have been someone from the Middle East or a terrorist organization or Arab or Muslim. There was a lot of reports of it must have been, one of these groups that when we think about terrorism, we oftentimes point the finger at. It turns out when the investigation finally was concluded, the guy who did it, one of the individuals, because he worked with one other person, was this guy, Timothy McVeigh, a white dude who just hated the government. And it wasn't a foreign terrorist, it was a domestic terrorist. So once again, going back to my pop-up message, when we are learning history, it's very important that when events happen, we respond with information based upon evidence versus gut feelings or rumors or sensational stories. And that's why I wanted you guys to think about. And I was really impressed when some of you, as group members, you guys were questioning each other. Well, maybe it was actually done by Cuba or the U.S. because, you know, you have to sift through the possibilities before you can come to what happened. Yeah.
I was gonna mention about the Boston bombing.
Uh-huh.
How when 9/11 happened, automatically terrorists were demonized as Muslim, and then the Boston bombers were not Muslim, but no one goes around pointing at white people. Oh, you must be a terrorist.
No, the Boston guys were
Were they Russian?
they were Russian, but they were Muslim. Not to say that Muslims.
They were Muslim.
Yeah, the brother was. The other guy was the younger brother was kind of caught up, influenced by his older brother. They say.
Did you see the photos that showed that it wasn't them who did it?
No.
There are photos and videos. There are other guys with the same backpacks.
Yeah. Are you're pulling? I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
Right.
there are
I mean, because you even get into it, there are people who say that it wasn't really Al Qaeda, that it was Bush who did it, that in order to cause a war in the Middle East, he had the Twin Towers knocked down, and I don't buy that at all because that gives way too much credit to the U.S. government to pull something off like that with no one talking. And there's so many holes in that story. Yeah, but that's the other thing. You're going to be presented by conspiracy theories, not just by the news, but by individuals. And you have to be, doubtful and questioning so you can actually make your own interpretation. So I just want you to think about that. Now, regardless of all those things, all of those factors, the destruction of the Maine, yellow journalism influencing public opinion, the desire of American people to help out the Cuban people, the desire of American business interests to protect their investments of $50 million in the sugar plantations, all of those things lead to the Spanish-American War, which is declared by Congress, supported by McKinley, in...
Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely. Let's get sad again.
April 1898, we go to war against Spain, the Spanish-American War. And this war is going to be the topic we're going to actually explore in more detail. And really, not the war itself, but the consequences of the war. This war is going to change the future of America, of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. It's going to be a turning point, and it's one of these wars that gets overshadowed by the Civil War or World War I or the Vietnam War because this war is going to be a short war. Now, I want you to take a look at this image here. What do you think this image is representing? What's the message, if you will, of this particular image? Yes.
That America is trying to protect Cuba. You see them holding Cuba is written on the bottom over there. Then I guess that guy's a general holding the American flag over the woman. I don't know. Kind of protecting her. Keeping them safe.
Okay. Anything else? More stuff in here. Yeah.
Kind of looks like Cuba's begging them to protect them.
Yeah. Cuba has the sad eyes on. Definitely got the sad eyes. Sad eyes, and they're kind of leaning towards. Yeah.
Since Cuba at the bottom, is that the territory?
Perhaps the territory.
So then the U.S. is kind of going to Cuba to protect them from other invaders or something.
Okay. Notice Uncle Sam's face. Uncle Sam, the famous figure, kind of staring off in the distance with this scowl on his face. He's looking angry, like he's looking off at a threat way off there to protect Cuba. And one of the things that happens when we declare war against Spain is we pass an amendment called the Teller Amendment. And we basically tell Cuba, get it, Teller Amendment, tell. We tell Cuba, hey, don't worry, we're your friend. We will leave Cuba. When the war is over, you will be free. We even sang them a song.
And we're the three best friends that anybody could have. We're the three best friends that anyone could have. We're the three best friends that anyone could have. And we'll never, never, ever, ever, ever leave each other. We're the best three friends that anybody could have. I mean the three best friends that anybody could have. That's right, the three best friends that anybody could have.
It should really say two best friends because it was just the U.S. and
Yeah.
Cuba, but hey, that's what the sound effect said. Hangover, the wolf pack. The Teller Amendment basically said, hey, Cuba, we will leave the island. You will have independence. You will have freedom when the war is done. Don't worry. We're not here to replace Spain as the new conqueror of Cuba. We're not here to colonize. So we tell Cuba, hey, you're going to get your independence. You'll have your flag. Cuba will be free. We'll honor the goal. Remember, Jose Marti, Cuba Libre. We will make sure this happens. Now we're going to take a look at what actually happens when the war is over, because this war is going to last, like I said, 4 months. The nickname of the war is the Splendid Little War. And what a lot of people don't realize is this is not just a war between the U.S. and Spain. It is the U.S., it is the Philippines, it is Cuba versus Spain. The war is going to take place not just in Cuba, but also it's going to start way the heck over into Asia in the Philippines. So this war that lasts 4 months is going to change the relationship and the history of 4 different countries. I haven't lost anybody yet because we're almost done. And if any point that you're confused about any of these facts, you are going to have a very difficult time proceeding with the next activity. Are we good? If we're good, everyone on 1, 2, 3 say good. 1, 2, 3.
Good.
You sounded good. Good. So here's what happens. A couple things before we end. Here's the wild thing about this war. More people die from bad food and disease. 2,061 American soldiers die from bad food, bad meat especially. Remember, this is 1898. This is before the jungle. This is before the Meat Inspection Act. This is before those reforms took place. So a lot of soldiers died from spoiled food and also disease caused by mosquitoes than actual fighting. If you take the number of Americans who died because of bullets or swords or things like that from Spain, it's 385. To give you some perspective of what this looks like compared to other wars, take a look. Civil War is our most deadly war in our history. Makes sense. We're fighting each other on our own soil. It lasts a long time. You're going to have a lot of dead people. World War II, second. World War I. Vietnam, we'll learn about second semester. Korean, we'll learn about second semester. Mexican-American War, we'll never learn about because that's 8th grade. Spanish-American War, the one we're learning about right now. But the problem with this number is this includes the war with the Filipinos, which is going to take place after the war is over against Spain. The American Revolution and the War of 1812. So if you think about it, this war is small, not only in time fought, but also in the number of Americans who died. Now, it sucks to be one of those people, but it's small compared to most of our major battles. Here's another thing I want you to think about. We have some all-stars in this war. Some guys who at this point, recognize anybody? Theodore. He was actually in a group who had the nickname because they were pretty rough and ready to ride.
Shut 'em down, open up shop. No, no, that's how Rough Riders roll. Stop.
The Rough Riders. Theodore Roosevelt. He was not president yet. He was not even vice president yet. He was a young, ambitious man. Theodore, there he is as a Rough Rider. He and his crew are going to fight in a lot of battles. There was a lot of them. There they are with their little group photo. Fun fact for Friday, FFF, Fun Fact Friday, For those of you that don't know, back in the 90s, there was a group of Rough Rider homies that included DMX, but what they did is they took the I in Rider and turned it into a Y.
Shut 'em down, open up shop. Oh, no, that's how Rough Riders roll. Stop.
Rough Riders, DMX. I don't think he raps anymore, does he? Does he? No. He yelled when he rapped. You know, that's the guy. They fought a battle. Not going to get too much into battles, but there was a bunch of battles that took place. The famous battle of San Juan Hill over there in Cuba, right there. They're running up the hill, and there's African-American soldiers who served in segregated units. We'll get to that later. There's white soldiers fighting, and they're running up the hill, San Juan Hill, and they're fighting the Spanish, and eventually the Spanish lose. Woo! But the first battle actually took place all the way over in Asia, in Manila, when a dude by the name of George Dewey, an American admiral, conquers the Spanish fleet, heads over from the China. Dewey goes into Manila, crushes the Spanish. You want to know how bad he crushes it? All you need to see is this painting right here. Look at America, flag flying, ship cruising. Look at Spain, halfway underwater and blowing up. That is a W, ladies and gentlemen. That is a win. George Dewey and the American Navy conquer the Spanish, but he's not working alone, because over in the Philippines, they have their own guy who had been fighting the Spanish way before we got there. His name is, of course, Emilio Aguinaldo.
And then a hero comes along with the strength to carry on, and you cast your fears aside, and you know you can survive. So when
Emilio Aguinaldo had been fighting the Spanish military with him and his fellow rebels against Spain. George Dewey and him joined forces to conquer Spain. Spain is defeated in the Philippines. Spain is defeated in Cuba. And it all ends with a treaty called the Treaty of
Peace. Peace. Peace.
Treaty of Paris. Treaty of Paris is going to change the world. And let me give you a couple of parts of the treaty.
Sorry, how many Treaty of Paris are there?
Lots of them. In American history, there's at least 5 I can name off the top of my head. They like to go to Paris. It's a nice place. Here's where Paris does. 1, Cuba
Peace. Peace. Peace.
is free. Cuba gets its independence. Not just Cuba, but in addition, Guam, Puerto Rico, Philippines, and Cuba.
Peace. Peace. Peace.
All of those countries are handed over to the United States of America. Now, during the negotiations, Spain says, hey, we have a lot of government buildings that we put in place in these countries. We built infrastructure there, roads and other things. So we need to get something for giving you all these 4 colonies. So $20 million
Peace. Peace. Peace.
is paid by the United States to Spain. Yes.
How much is that worth now?
I don't know. They have a website where you can put it in and it'll tell you, but I don't know offhand. We could do that in just a moment to figure it out. To give you an idea of what this means, look at the map. You have the Philippines. You have Guam, which is a small island. You have Puerto Rico and Cuba. You have these 4 territories are now a part of American territory. And we have to figure out what are we going to do with them, which is where you all come in our next activity. There was a general belief in America that this war, and this is something that is very important, is a turning point. Because for the first time in our nation's history, we have expanded not just from East Coast to West Coast. We've expanded across oceans. We have become, as a result of the Spanish-American War, an empire. And there was a real belief that this was a good thing amongst some people. Here is a campaign ad for William McKinley and his new guy who's going to be his VP, Theodore Roosevelt, and you'll notice at the bottom of this campaign ad, they're bragging about what America has done in Cuba. On the one hand, you have the poverty, the misery, the suffering of Spanish rule, and on the other, the progress, the prosperity, the hope of American rule. In fact, you look over and over again, there's this belief that by expanding, we are doing a good thing, not just for us, but for those people whose territory we have acquired, whether it be Hawaii or Cuba. And that our empire is one in which Uncle Sam has a duty and a responsibility to administer. So, here's what we're going to do. First off, are there any questions? Spanish-American War is going to lead many Americans to question this war and question the outcome. And the questions that people are asking is, does the United States have the right to extend its power over other land? Is America supposed to be an empire? And for some Americans, they saw this as a golden opportunity to become a world power, a world leader. And for others, they felt that we should not get involved. And that's where you get involved, because you're going to come up with an argument.